Ever stop and think about power? Like, who actually gets to hold it and why?
It's a fundamental question, really.
Yeah. And today on the deep dive, we're diving into a pretty fascinating story how England, way back, started moving away from kings having all the power, absolute rulers.
Toward a system where more people actually got a say in things?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
basically the story of how democracy started to, well, get its footing in England.
Right. And look, history can sometimes feel like just a list of dates and kings, can it?
Totally. Memorizing names.
But this shift, it's actually a really gripping story, full of power struggles, big ideas. The sources we've looked at, they really lay out this journey.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack the key moments, the key ideas that really changed how England was run and how that set the stage for, well, modern democracy in many ways.
Precisely. And it wasn't quick, was it?
No, definitely not overnight. This was a long haul, hundreds of years, sometimes pretty messy too.
Very messy at times. It was like a slow chipping away at that old idea that one person, the monarch, should have absolute control.
And the sources we're using today, they really zero in on that crucial time when the whole kings have absolute power thing started getting seriously challenged.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how these core ideas started bubbling up and taking shape. To really get the big picture, we need to understand these concepts. Maybe we should start with the divine right of kings. Sounds pretty grand.
It does. Okay, so what exactly was the deal with the divine right of kings?
Well, basically, it was the belief that the king or queen got their authority to rule directly from God.
Wow. So not chosen by people, but by, like, a higher power,
Exactly. So the king was God's representative on earth, in a way, and this meant that anything the king decided was seen as almost divinely approved.
which makes challenging the king pretty tricky, right? It's almost like challenging God's plan.
That was the idea. It really cemented the king's power, made them seem almost untouchable. It's the absolute bedrock of, well, absolute power.
Okay, so it's the total opposite of thinking that government power should come from the people it governs.
Precisely. And that's the idea people eventually started questioning and pushing back against, which is where things get interesting.
Right. And one of the really early, really significant moments in that pushback was the Magna Carta,
Mhm.
way back in 1215.
Yeah, 1215. It feels like ancient history, but it was incredibly important. Magna Carta just means Great Charter,
Okay.
and it was one of the very first times a king's power was formally limited by, like, a written agreement. It wasn't about overthrowing the king.
Not yet, anymore.
No, not yet. But it forced King John to agree to certain rights, and crucially, to accept that even he wasn't above the law.
So it was basically the nobles saying, hang on a minute, King John, there are some rules you have to follow too.
Pretty much. It set this vital precedent that the monarch's power wasn't limitless. And it introduced some key ideas, like due process of law.
Due process. Okay, we hear that phrase a lot even today. What did it mean back then, in simple terms?
At its core, it meant the government, the king, couldn't just punish someone on a whim. There had to be fair legal steps followed, like a proper trial, before someone could be chucked in prison or have their stuff taken away.
So no more just deciding you don't like someone and locking them up in the Tower of London.
Well, that was the goal, yeah. To make the legal system more predictable, more just, less dependent on whether the king was having a good or bad day. This idea of fair procedures is a massive step.
And that connects to another legal idea, right? Common law.
Exactly. Common law is interesting because it wasn't just laws handed down by the king.
Right.
It developed over time based on customs and, importantly, on decisions made in courts. These decisions set precedents, creating a body of law that became common across the whole country.
So it wasn't just the king making rules on the fly. There was this growing system of law based on actual cases and decisions.
Precisely. And this, along with things like the Magna Carta, gave people more footing. It meant there were established rights and legal processes that even the king theoretically had to respect. It put another check on that absolute power idea.
Okay, so we're seeing limits on the king, a developing legal system. Now, what about Parliament? That becomes a huge player in this story.
Right, Parliament. Think of it as England's main lawmaking body, a bit like Congress in the US today, but its origins go way back. It started more as a council to advise the king.
Mostly nobles and church leaders at first.
Yes, initially, but over centuries, its role grew. Crucially, it became a place where the monarch's power could be challenged, especially when it came to money taxes.
Ah, the power of the purse. So the king couldn't just raise taxes whenever he felt like it. He needed Parliament's agreement, at least sometimes.
Ideally, yes. Now, the actual power balance shifted back and forth a lot over history. Some kings ignored Parliament, others worked with it. But its existence meant there was another center of power, another voice besides the monarchs.
Got it. Now let's flip to the other side. You mentioned absolutism. That sounds like the complete opposite of everything we've just discussed.
It is, exactly. Absolutism is the idea that the ruler should have total, absolute, unchecked power. Everything revolves around the monarch.
And some English kings actually aimed for that, believing fully in their divine right and wanting no limits.
Oh, definitely. Kings like James I and Charles I, for example, strongly believed in their divine right and clashed with Parliament because they didn't like being told what they could or couldn't do.
And that desire for absolute rule, that must have caused a lot of conflict, right? It seems bound to clash with Parliament and common law and Magna Carta principles.
Absolutely. That tension between monarchs wanting absolute power and Parliament wanting to limit that power is really the engine driving a lot of the major events in this period, including eventually civil war.
Okay, another term that comes up is habeas corpus. Sounds very legal.
It is, and it's incredibly important. Habeas corpus is Latin. It basically means you shall have the body.
Great.
It's a legal protection, a writ that stops unlawful imprisonment. If someone's locked up, habeas corpus means they have the right to be brought before a judge or court.
To see if they're being held legally. Yeah.
Exactly. To determine if there's a legitimate reason for their detention. You can't just hold someone indefinitely without showing cause.
So it's like a fundamental safeguard. Show me the reason you're holding this person.
Precisely. It's a massive check on the state's power to detain people arbitrarily. Even the king couldn't just lock people up and throw away the key without facing a legal challenge. Hugely important for individual liberty.
Okay, so things are bubbling along, tensions rising. Then we get to the mid-1600s, and things really explode with Oliver Cromwell and the Civil War.
Yeah, that period was, well, revolutionary is the right word. The conflicts between King Charles I, who was a real believer in his divine right, and Parliament boiled over into the English Civil War.
A full-blown war.
Yes, between the royalists supporting the king and the parliamentarians. Long story short, Parliament's forces, led by figures like Oliver Cromwell, won.
And then something truly radical happened.
They executed the king. Charles I was tried and executed in 1649.
Wow. Executing a divinely appointed king. That must have sent shockwaves everywhere.
It was seismic, unprecedented in England. It showed dramatically that a monarch could be held accountable for their actions, even to the point of death. The monarchy was abolished for a time.
And England became a republic.
Yes, the Commonwealth. With Oliver Cromwell eventually ruling as Lord Protector, it proved that absolute monarchy wasn't untouchable.
But it didn't immediately turn into a stable democracy, did it?
Yeah.
I mean, Cromwell himself became very powerful.
That's a really crucial point. Getting rid of the king didn't automatically mean democracy. Cromwell's rule became essentially a military dictatorship. It shows that the path away from absolutism is complicated, not always straightforward.
Right. Which leads us to the Restoration in 1660. What was restored?
The monarchy. After Cromwell died, there was instability, and eventually Parliament invited Charles II, the son of the executed Charles I, back to take the throne.
So the king was back. Did things just go back to how they were before the war?
Not quite, and this is key. Charles II and the monarchs after him had significantly less power than Charles I had claimed before the war.
Ah, so Parliament had managed to hold on to some ground.
Definitely. They'd shown their strength. They'd run the country without a king for a decade. They weren't going to just roll over. The restored monarchy had to acknowledge Parliament's increased influence.
Okay, so the power balance is shifting, which brings us to another massive event. The Glorious Revolution in 1688. Why glorious?
Well, it's often called that because compared to the Civil War, it involved relatively little violence and bloodshed in England, though there was fighting elsewhere.
Got it. So what happened?
King James II, Charles II's brother, took the throne. He was Catholic and also tried to assert royal power over Parliament and the law. Parliament got very worried.
Oh, déjà vu.
Sort of.
Yeah.
So a group of leading nobles and parliamentarians basically invited William of Orange, a Dutch prince married to James II's Protestant daughter, Mary, to come over with an army.
They invited a foreign prince to invade.
Effectively, yes. William landed, James II lost support and fled the country. Parliament then offered the throne jointly to William and Mary.
So Parliament basically fired one king and hired another.
That's a pretty good way to put it. It decisively showed that Parliament now held the ultimate authority. They dictated the terms, not the monarch. It was a massive assertion of parliamentary supremacy.
And flowing directly from that, we get the English Bill of Rights In 1689, what did that do?
This was huge. It was a law passed by Parliament that William and Mary had to agree to. It formally limited the monarch's powers even further.
How so? What kind of limits?
Things like the monarch couldn't suspend laws passed by Parliament, couldn't raise taxes without Parliament's consent, couldn't keep a standing army in peacetime without consent. It also guaranteed certain rights.
For people or Parliament?
Both, really. It guaranteed things like free elections for Parliament, freedom of speech within Parliament, and protections against things like excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishments.
So it's really laying down clear rules for the monarch and guaranteeing freedoms.
Absolutely. It explicitly stated that the monarch was subject to the law enacted by Parliament. This was the death knell for the old ideas of divine right and absolutism in England.
Which leads us, finally, to the idea of a constitutional monarchy. That's basically what England became then.
Yes. A constitutional monarchy is a system where you still have a king or queen, a monarch.
But they don't have absolute power.
Exactly. Their powers are strictly limited by the country's constitution and laws, which are made by the elected body Parliament. The real day-to-day governing power lies with Parliament and the government it supports.
So the monarch is more like a head of state, a symbolic figure, but Parliament runs the show.
That's the essence of it. The monarch reigns, but Parliament governs. This system, established after the Glorious Revolution and the Bill of Rights, was the outcome of centuries of those power struggles we've been talking about.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a journey. We've gone from divine right all the way to constitutional monarchy.
It's a massive transformation, and you see how each step, each concept built on the last or reacted against it. Magna Carta sets a precedent.
Common law develops alongside it.
Parliament gains influence, clashes with absolutist ideas.
Civil War, restoration with less royal power.
Glorious Revolution, and then the Bill of Rights locking in those parliamentary powers and individual rights.
It really paints a picture of a gradual, sometimes forceful, shift of power away from one person towards a representative body and the rule of law.
Precisely. Establishing principles like limited government, the idea that government power isn't absolute the rule of law, meaning everyone's accountable, even the rulers.
And recognizing individual rights, things that are, pretty central to democracies today.
Exactly. Their origins lie in these historical struggles in places like England. It wasn't planned out neatly. It emerged through conflict and compromise over a very long time.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up and make sure we've got the key takeaways, let's run through a few quick points.
Good idea. Fire away.
First up, divine right of kings versus the Magna Carta. What was the core clash there?
Divine right. King gets power from God, answers only to God. Magna Carta. First major challenge says even the king is subject to some laws and can't just do anything. It limits that divine power, practically speaking.
Okay, and habeas corpus, why is that such a big deal? In simple terms.
It stops the government from just locking people up without a proper reason and a court checking that reason. It's your basic protection against unfair imprisonment. Fundamental.
Right. And how did the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution boost Parliament's power?
Civil War showed Parliament could defeat and even execute a king who pushed absolutism too far. Glorious Revolution. Parliament basically chose the king and queen, proving it had the ultimate authority over the crown.
Makes sense. Difference between absolutism and constitutional monarchy.
Absolutism. Ruler has total, unchecked power. Constitutional monarchy. Monarch exists, but their power is strictly limited by laws and a constitution, with Parliament holding the real governing power.
Got it. And finally, maybe name 3 key documents or events that were crucial milestones, and just a quick why.
Okay, 3. Magna Carta, 1215, first big step limiting the king, rule of law. Glorious Revolution, 1688. Parliament becomes supreme over the monarch. English Bill of Rights, 1689, locks down limits on the king, guarantees rights for Parliament and people.
Perfect. That really pulls it all together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've taken quite the deep dive into how democracy started to take root in England.
We have. It's a story of centuries, really. Shifting power, developing ideas about rights and governance.
And it definitely leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how long that struggle was just to get a voice in how you're governed.
It does. It maybe makes us think about the challenges democracies face even today. Considering this long fight in England, what do you think are the biggest hurdles for democracy around the world now? And can understanding this history help us tackle them?
That's a great question to ponder. Something for everyone listening to maybe think about after this.
Absolutely. And if this has sparked your interest, you could always, look up the actual text of the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights online, see the original words. Or read more about figures like Cromwell or William and Mary. There's always more layers to peel back.
Definitely. Well, that's all we have time for on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.